Hey, hi and welcome back. I hope that you are enjoying this training. So in previous video, we discussed the USB ASP programmer in detail, okay? And I hope that every single thing that we discussed regarding that programmer is now clear to you. And in this video, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to USB to UART converter. So in this video, you will get to know what's basically the USB to UART converter and every single thing regarding this converter. Okay, so now let's start with this video. So now let me tell you what you're going to learn in this video. So the first point is what is USB to UART converter and its purpose. So I will discuss what's basically the USB to UART converter and for what purpose we use it. Okay, so that point we will cover. Then the next point is pin configuration of USB to UART converter. So again, like previous video, we will discuss the pin configuration of USB to UART converter. So we will see what are the different pins which are available on this converter. Then the next point is how to connect USB to UART converter to hardware. So again, we will discuss how we need to connect this converter to our hardware. Means we are actually going to connect this converter directly to the pins of microcontroller. So which are those pins we will discuss with this point. Okay, so these are the 3 points that we are going to cover in this video, and I'm sure you will definitely enjoy this video. All right, so now let's start with this video. So this is how basically the USB to UART converter look like. Okay, and there are actually different USB to UART converter available in market. And this particular module or this particular USB to UART converter is actually very popular. That's the reason I have included this one in this image. Okay, so as the name indicates, USB to UART converter. So this is basically the USB side of this USB to UART converter, and this is actually the UART side of this converter. Now, what's basically USB to UART converter? Let's discuss that. We discussed that in controller, there is actually a UART interface, and to that UART interface, there are actually 2 pins. The first one is TX pin, which is transmit pin, and then the second pin is RX pin. Okay. So for example, let's say that if you have to send the data from the controller to the computer and you want to check that data, or you want to check what's basically the strings that we have sent from the microcontroller to computer, in that case, we actually use this USB to UART converter. The reason is we can't connect the microcontroller's UART interface directly to the computer because in computer there is no such provision. But in computer there is actually the USB port. Okay, so we need some kind of converter which will convert the UART data to USB data. Okay, and this particular IC is actually responsible for converting the UART data to USB data. For example, if the controller is sending some data over the TX line, then this particular IC is actually responsible for converting the UART interface data to USB interface data. And if you are sending some data from the computer to the microcontroller, then again this particular IC is going to take that data from the USB interface and it's going to convert that data and make it compatible for the UART interface. Okay, so I hope that this point is now clear to you, and that's the reason it is actually called as USB to UART converter. Okay, or it is also called as UART to USB converter because it's basically bidirectional. It's going to take the data from this side and it's going to provide the data on the output side, which is on controller side. Again, it's going to take the data from the controller side and it's going to provide the data on the USB side. Okay, so it's basically it's going to execute the bidirectional function. Okay, now on top of this IC you can see FTDI is written. So here it is actually written FTDI. FTDI stands for Future Technology Devices International. Okay, so that's basically the name of company, and this FTDI chip FT232RL, it's actually manufactured by this particular company. Okay, and you can see around this particular IC there are very few components, like this resistor is there, then there are 2 LEDs are connected here, then there are few capacitors which are connected around this USB connector. And then here you can see there are actually 3 headers or 3 male headers, and on this side 3.3 volt is written, on this side 5 volt is written. So if you are using a 5 volt compatible device on the UART interface, then there will be jumper or these two pins should be shorted, okay? And if you are using a 3.3 volt compatible device on this side, then these two pins should be shorted, okay? So the position of jumper is actually going to decide what will be the voltage level of TX pin on the output side, okay? So if you select these two pins or if you connect these two pins together, then the voltage level of TX pin, it's going to be 0 and 5 volt. So likewise, in that particular range, the signals will be generated on the output side. And if these two pins are shorted, then the voltage level of TX pin, it's going to be, 0 to 3.3 volt. So you can use this particular USB to TTL converter for both the type of devices which works on 5 volt or which are basically 5 volt compatible and 3.3 volt compatible, okay? So I hope that most of the things related to this particular USB to TTL converter is now clear to you, okay? So now let's go ahead. So now let's see the pin configuration of USB to UART converter. So on this USB to UART converter, you can see there are actually different pins here. So they have given the names of all the pins, but not all these pins are actually important. We are just interested in these pins to which this header is connected. So DTR pin is important, RX pin is important, TX pin is important, then VCC is not important, CTS is not important, and again ground is important. So out of all these pins, we are just interested in 4 pins, which is DTR, RX, TX, then ground, okay? We are not interested in VCC and CTS. So these are basically the important pins of USB to UART converter, and it doesn't matter what USB to UART converter you purchase from the market, it's going to have these pins DTR, RX, TX, then ground, okay? And these pins you need to use whenever you have to communicate with the microcontroller, okay? So now let's see the interfacing between the microcontroller and this USB to UART converter. So whenever you have to send the data from the controller, you know that we are going to use this RX and TX pin of UART interface, and we have connected these pins to this header. You can see this TX pin is connected to pin number 6 on this header, which is debug TX, and then this RX pin is connected to pin number 5 on this header, which is debug RX, okay? So this debug TX pin, it will be connected to this RX pin on this USB to UART converter, and then this debug TX pin, it will be connected to this TX pin of this USB to UART converter. So you have to, TX should be connected to the RX and RX should be connected to TX. So I hope that that's clear. And then this ground pin, it should be connected to ground pin, okay? So at this moment, let's not discuss about DTR. In upcoming video, you will get to know what's basically the purpose of this DTR pin. At this moment, let's not discuss this particular pin, okay? And from this image, you will get to know how exactly the connection is going to be between the computer and the microcontroller. So for example, if the controller has to send some data on the computer, then this is how basically the connections are going to be. Ground will be connected to ground pin on the microcontroller, then TX will be connected to the RX of microcontroller, and RX will be connected to TX of microcontroller, okay? And this, even if you don't connect this orange wire, which is actually connected between DTR and reset, so what's the significance of this? I will discuss that in next video. So in order to do the communication between the microcontroller and computer, you just need 3 wires, which is ground and RX TX wire, okay? And whenever you will send the data from the controller, it's going to travel through TX pin, then it will be available on RX pin, then through this USB to UART converter, it will travel through this wire, and then you will be able to see that data on the computer, okay? And then again, if you are sending some data from the computer, then it will come through this wire, through this IC, then it will be available on the TX pin of this IC, and it's connected to the RX pin of microcontroller. So on RX pin, you will be able to read that particular data, okay? So now let me show you one image, and from that image, you will get more clarity about it. So from this image, you will get more clarity about what I was talking. So whenever you have to check the data sent by the controller on TX pin of UART interface on the computer, first of all, you have to open the terminal window, or it can be any type of terminal software. And in our case, we are actually going to use the terminal window of Arduino IDE. So you have to open the terminal window of Arduino IDE, and then if the controller is sending the data, then it will be, it will be printed on the terminal window. So for example, if controller is sending hello world, then you will be able to see that data on the terminal window. So controller is going to send that data over the TX line of UART interface. It's going to travel through the wires. Then it will be received over the RX pin of this USB to TTL converter IC, which is FT232RL. Then it will travel through this wire, and then it will be visible, or you will be able to see that data on the terminal window. Okay. And in the same way, if you have to send some data from this terminal window towards this microcontroller, then you have to type that data here, and after that you have to give enter. And once you give the enter, that data will travel through this wire, then through this USB to UART converter IC, and again that data will be available on TX pin of this USB to UART converter IC, and it's going to travel over the wire, and then it will be available on the RX pin of the microcontroller. Okay, so that's how basically you can do the communication between the microcontroller and computer. So this is actually done, whenever you have to send some data on the computer, or whenever you have to receive some data from the computer. Okay, generally we use this particular method whenever we have to do the communication between the controller and the computer, or whenever we have to send, or whenever we have to observe the data which is sent by the controller on the computer. Okay, so these are basically two purposes for which we use this particular USB to UART converter. Okay, so I hope that every single thing that we discussed regarding this USB to UART converter in this video is now clear to you, and I hope that you got the purpose of USB to UART converter when we deal with the hardware. Okay, alright, so that's what I wanted to tell in this video. I hope that every single thing that we discussed in this video is now clear to you, and if you still have any kind of doubt, then definitely you can reach to me and I will help you with that. Okay, alright, so now I will see you in the next video, which is about different methods to program Atmega 328 microcontroller. Okay, so I will see you in the next video now.